Did you know that billions of years ago, Earth was nothing but a vast water world, with no trees, no mountains, not even a single creature walking on land? That long before the first dinosaurs, before the first forests, even before fish had formed bones, the oceans were already alive with strange, silent, and otherworldly beings. Creatures with no eyes, no limbs, no spine, drifting through ancient seas that never felt the warmth of sunlight, yet somehow learned how to eat, move, and survive. This is the story of that forgotten age, when life was born not on land, but in the deep, dark cradle of ancient oceans. If you've ever wondered how life began, not with footsteps, but with ripples in the sea, then this journey will take you back farther than you've ever imagined. And if stories like this truly make you feel calm, curious, or just amazed at the mysteries of our past, then don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more. In the beginning, the Earth was a place wildly different from the peaceful world we see today. There were no oceans, no clouds drifting lazily through the sky, and no soft breezes brushing against the surface of the planet. Instead, Earth existed as a glowing, violent sphere of molten rock, constantly shifting and reshaping under the pressure of intense heat and gravity. The land was made of nothing but liquid stone. The atmosphere was a suffocating haze of carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur, and steaming water vapor, rising like a cloak of shadows from a planet that was still struggling to form. Storms did not bring rain, they brought fire. Lightning cracked through the skies without the relief of rainfall, and the surface trembled under the constant eruption of volcanoes that split the crust open again and again. And yet, in the silence that followed each explosion of heat and fury, the Earth was slowly cooling. The molten rivers of rock hardened. The fiery storms quieted just a little. Over millions of years, the temperature dropped just enough for something extraordinary to begin. The water vapor in the air, which had been trapped in the skies like a ghostly ocean of steam, now started to condense. The skies darkened. Clouds of unimaginable size formed overhead, thicker and heavier than any cloud that exists today. Then, in a moment that would change the fate of the planet forever, it began to rain. Not for hours or even days, but for thousands upon thousands of years. The rain fell in endless sheets, a downpour so immense, so constant, and so powerful that the entire surface of the Earth began to flood. Rivers did not form slowly, lakes did not trickle into existence. Instead, oceans were born suddenly, filling every depression, every crater, every valley, until the whole world was covered in water. It was during this time, when the last of the lava hardened beneath the waves, that our planet went through its first great transformation. The fiery world of rock and darkness became a world of water and reflection. The seas were not calm. They boiled and churned from the heat still trapped beneath the surface. They were filled with minerals and chemicals, stirred by the violent heartbeat of the young Earth. The skies were grey and dim, but the oceans were vast, endless, and full of possibility. No creature swam through these early waters. No plant grew from the sea floor. But the oceans themselves held the ingredients for everything that would someday breathe, walk, swim, or fly. They were like a silent laboratory, a space where the building blocks of life, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and more, were waiting for the right moment to connect. In these waters, beneath waves that never rested, something invisible and extraordinary was beginning. Tiny molecules were colliding, reacting, forming new shapes again and again. The Earth did not know it yet, but life was coming. Not soon, not quickly, but inevitably, carried on the tides of chemistry, energy, and time. What makes this moment so astonishing is not just that the oceans formed, but that they formed before anything living existed to witness them. The first oceans did not sparkle with sunlight, nor did they shine with the reflections of a moonlit sky. They existed in darkness, with barely a glimmer of blue light reaching through the thick atmosphere. Yet, they were the beginning of everything. Every creature that would one day swim in the sea, every being that would one day crawl onto land, every living thing that would breathe the air or feel the warmth of the sun, all of them would trace their origins back to this moment. The Earth, once a planet of fire, had become a planet of water. And in that transformation, though it was still silent, still lifeless, still dark, the stage was finally set. The first oceans would soon become the cradle of life, the place where the greatest story ever told began in absolute quiet, deep beneath the waves. And so, the world waited. The oceans flowed, the rain slowed, the clouded skies began to thin, and the earth stood ready for the next chapter in its long, ancient journey. Before forests rose, before insects crawled, before anything had legs, wings, or eyes to see the world. The earth was quiet, wrapped in the soft, rolling rhythm of its first oceans. There were no trees casting shadows, no birds soaring overhead, no animals leaving footprints behind. There was only water, stretching endlessly in all directions, reflecting nothing but a sky that was still finding its calm. Imagine a time when every coastline was nothing more than the soft curve of a newborn world. No sand, no shells, only rock and tide. The waves would rise and fall in perfect silence, their constant motion shaping the edges of a planet that had no life to witness it. Days and nights passed without a single sound from a living thing. The world breathed, but it did not yet pulse with life. The air was different then. It was thick with gases we cannot breathe, methane, carbon dioxide, and traces of ammonia. There was no oxygen, no clear sky, and no blue horizon. The Earth in this time was a world of muted colors and long, drifting clouds. Yet even in this stillness, something ancient and powerful was stirring beneath the waters. The oceans, though silent, were alive with motion. Tides shifted under the pull of the moon. Currents twisted with the Earth's rotation, and the deep waters churned with heat that rose from the core below. Even in the absence of life, the sea was never still. It carried particles of minerals, whispers of chemistry, memories of storms long past. And it carried something else, the potential for change. For millions of years, the oceans existed this way, endlessly moving, endlessly patient. The surface rippled gently with every breeze, though no leaf ever rustled in the wind. The sound of water was the only sound the world knew. On the seafloor, strange landscapes formed. Mountains of cooled lava, plains of ancient stone, valleys lit only by the faint glow of minerals. If you could sink into that darkness, you would find a place untouched by sunlight, untouched by sound, untouched by anything familiar. And yet, in this place where nothing lived, conditions were slowly, quietly becoming right for something new. The oceans were filled with molecules, hydrogen, carbon, sulfur, phosphorus, all drifting through currents like ingredients in a recipe still waiting to be mixed. Energy from deep-sea vents rippled through the water, igniting reactions that had never happened before. Lightning flashed in the skies and touched the surface of the sea, splitting atoms and creating new bonds. It was in this environment, one that seemed empty but was overflowing with possibility, that the first whispers of life were beginning. The oceans were not dead. They were waiting. And beneath the waves, in places no sunlight reached, countless invisible reactions were taking place over and over for millions of years. This was not a world of speed or sound. It was a world of patience. Time did not rush. Change did not hurry. The Earth, still young, was letting its story unfold at a pace slower than any creature could ever comprehend. Each drop of water, each drift of chemical, each surge of heat or pressure played a role in shaping what was to come. There might have been moments where the Earth seemed completely still, but beneath the surface, something delicate and astonishing was preparing to reveal itself. And when it did, not with a roar or an explosion, but with a single quiet spark, everything would begin to change. This period in Earth's history is often called the world before life, but in truth, it was a world preparing for life, a world of silent waters, silent skies, and silent shorelines, holding its breath in the calm of a time before anything moved on its own. From the outside, nothing happened, but within the oceans, Piece by piece, the foundation of life was being built. Slowly, quietly, perfectly. The stage was set. The waters were ready. And the world, still so empty, was beginning to whisper with the promise of its first living forms. Forms that would soon rise from nothing and forever rewrite the story of the earth. In the deep ancient oceans of the silent earth, something miraculous began to stir. It did not roar to life or burst into existence with light and sound. Instead, it appeared quietly, invisibly, as if it had been waiting all along, hidden within the stillness of water, chemistry, and time. Life's first form was tiny, so tiny that if you could travel back to this moment, no eye, no instrument, nothing we could even imagine today would be able to see it. It was a single cell, a structure so simple, yet so powerful, that from it, every plant, every animal, every human, and every form of life that would ever exist had already begun its long journey through evolution. This first cell did not have bones. It did not have a mind. It had no eyes to see the world around it, no limbs to move, no organs to breathe. But it had something more precious than all of that. It had instructions. The earliest form of genetic material, coiled within a soft membrane, carrying information that guided how it would survive, how it would grow, and how it could make copies of itself. No one knows exactly when this moment happened. Scientists believe it took place more than 3.5 billion years ago, in waters warmed by volcanic vents or stirred by lightning. Some think the first life formed near hydrothermal vents deep in the ocean, where mineral-rich water surged from the planet's crust like ancient breath. Others suggest it may have begun in shallow pools, where sunlight could mix with chemistry in gentle tides. Whatever the setting, one truth remains the same. The universe changed forever when the first living cell appeared. It was both fragile and resilient. It lived not through strength, but through balance. It floated, fed, divided, and drifted through the water, unaware of itself, unaware of its importance. Yet, it carried within it the blueprint of everything to come. And so began the long story of life. Not with a roar, but with a pulse. A single, quiet pulse. These early cells were known as prokaryotes. They had no nucleus, no complex structures. They were like tiny bubbles, each one holding a thread of information, reacting to the world with only the simplest instincts. Absorb, grow, divide, survive. They did not eat other creatures. There were no other creatures yet. Instead, they fed on the chemicals of the oceans around them, taking in energy from their environment and using it to grow. Over millions of years, these cells did something extraordinary. They didn't just survive, they multiplied. Over and over, they split into two, and then those two became four, and soon there were billions. Oceans that had once been empty were now filled with tiny, drifting forms of life. So small, so delicate, yet so vital. The Earth, at long last, had begun to breathe. But something even more incredible was waiting to happen. Among these early cells, some learned a new trick, one that would change the planet completely. These cells learned how to capture sunlight and turn it into energy. This process, now called photosynthesis, allowed them not only to survive, but to thrive. And in doing so, they released something new into the world. Oxygen. At first, the oxygen released by these simple microbes was quickly absorbed by the metals and rocks in the oceans. But as time went on, those sinks filled up. The oceans could no longer hold the oxygen. So the gas began to rise, little by little, into the atmosphere. The skies, once filled with haze and suffocating gases, were now slowly becoming something different, something that future life would depend on. Breathable air. These earliest photosynthetic organisms were building a future they could not see. They had no idea that by releasing oxygen, they were preparing the way for other forms of life, creatures that needed oxygen to live, to breathe, to move. But that is how evolution works. With no plan, no purpose, no guide, just endless repetition, tiny chance, and time. With each passing generation, the oceans filled with more and more life. The surface of the sea, once empty and quiet, now shimmered with the invisible activity of countless cells, drifting together in a slow, ancient dance beneath the waves. And though they were small, they were not alone anymore. The first breath of existence had come. The Earth, for the first time in its long and silent history, was alive. Long before forests spread across the land, long before animals crawled or swam or flew, the Earth was home to builders, but not builders of stone or wood or anything that we might recognize today. These were the builders of life, not with tools, but with cells. And the structures they built were unlike anything the Earth had ever seen before. These builders were stromatolites. Stromatolites are among the oldest fossils on Earth, and their story begins more than 3 billion years ago. To the eye, they look like layered mounds of rock, stacked like ancient pancakes, rising slowly from shallow marine waters. But they are not just stones. They are living monuments created by tiny organisms, among the very first architects of life. These organisms were cyanobacteria, simple, single-celled beings that floated near the surface of ancient seas. They did something unbelievably important. They used sunlight to create energy. They took in carbon dioxide and released oxygen. With each day, each moment of sunlight, each ripple of water, they carried out the slow, steady work of life and left behind a record of their existence that still stands billions of years later. Here's how it happened. Imagine a shallow pool near the coast of a newborn world. The water is calm. The sun shines down through a hazy alien sky. Beneath the surface, tiny cells drift and gather, forming a living carpet across the floor of the sea. The cyanobacteria cluster together, growing and dividing, spreading out in soft, sticky layers. As they live and die, they trap grains of sand and minerals. Day by day, they build new layers of living tissue, and beneath that, a foundation of sediment. Over time, the mound grows. It rises slowly, a tiny ripple in the shallow water. The sunlight continues to shine. The bacteria continue to grow. The mound continues to rise, and eventually it becomes a stromatolite, a structure both alive and ancient, made not by hands, but by life itself. These living layers would build up over centuries, then thousands of years, then millions, without sound, without rush, without even knowing. The cyanobacteria had no awareness of what they were creating, but they were shaping the future of the planet. Stromatolites were not rare in those ancient days. They covered shorelines and shallow seas all around the world. They were the first great ecosystems, vast quiet meadows beneath the waves, teeming with photosynthetic life. They created oxygen, they built reefs, and they left behind fossils that would one day show us how early life looked and lived. But their gift was far greater than rock formations or fossils. Stromatolites are the first signs of complex cooperative life. They show us that even the simplest cells can work together, building something greater than themselves. And they were vital in creating Earth's breathable atmosphere. Every breath we take today is a distant echo of their long, patient work. The air that fills your lungs, the oxygen that supports every heartbeat, every moment of thought, every movement of your body, began its journey here, in the soft, shallow waters, in the quiet light of an ancient sun, in the hands, or rather, the cells, of these tiny, tireless organisms. As time passed, the world changed. The oxygen released by these stromatolites began to accumulate. What was once a trace in the atmosphere became a presence, and then, eventually, a force. The skies shifted, the air cleared, the oceans changed their chemistry, and life, slowly, began to change along with it. But stromatolites did not vanish. Even now, billions of years later, they still exist. They can still be found in places like Shark Bay in Australia, quietly rising from the shallow waters, just as they did before there were fish, before there were trees, before there were birds in the sky or voices in the air. They are among the oldest living things on Earth. And if you were to stand beside one and place your hand against its rough, layered surface, you would be touching not just stone, but living history. you would feel the echo of the first breath of life, still humming gently through time. In a world that once had no sound, no animals, no plants, no heartbeat, the stromatolites were there, rising from the sea, patient, persistent, ancient, and because of them, life moved forward. The earth, once a world of muted, murky waters, began to change. For billions of years, life had existed in silence, beneath clouds thick with gases that could suffocate any modern creature. The oceans, though alive with microbes, were still heavy with dissolved chemicals, unfit for most forms of life we recognize today. Then, slowly, steadily, a quiet revolution began. A transformation so profound that it would reshape the planet forever. This was the Great Oxygenation Event, or, as it is sometimes called, the Oxygen Revolution. It began with the cyanobacteria, those tireless microscopic architects of life, building their layered stromatolites in the shallow seas. They performed photosynthesis, a process so simple and natural to them, yet so monumental in its effect. They took carbon dioxide and sunlight and water and transformed them into energy, while releasing oxygen as a byproduct. For millions of years, this oxygen was absorbed into the oceans, chemically binding with minerals like iron, rusting the rocks at the bottom of the sea. The air remained dense, murky, and toxic. But the Earth was changing from within. Eventually, the oceans could no longer absorb the oxygen. Slowly, molecule by molecule, gas escaped into the atmosphere. The skies began to clear, and the color of the seas itself started to shift. The waters, once heavy with chemical haze, began to reflect a pale, almost translucent blue. Life had found a way to alter the very fabric of the planet without a single thought, without a single eye to witness it. The tiniest organisms, invisible to the naked eye, had begun to shape the Earth's destiny. This change was not immediate. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. The atmosphere, still filled with methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen, was far from what we would call breathable. But the slow accumulation of oxygen began a cascade of consequences, some beneficial, some catastrophic. For the first time, oxygen touched places it had never reached, reacting violently with the chemicals of the seas and the rocks. It poisoned many forms of life that had thrived in the low oxygen environment, leading to extinction events even before life had fully diversified. Yet it also made possible what had previously been unimaginable: the evolution of complex life. With oxygen rising, the very chemistry of the oceans transformed. Iron, once abundant in the waters, precipitated out, creating layers of rust-colored rock that still tell this ancient story today. The seas slowly became more hospitable to organisms that required oxygen to survive. Tiny predators could evolve. Cells could develop more intricate structures, more energy-efficient ways to survive, to grow, and to reproduce. The oxygenation of the oceans was like lighting a fire under the engine of life, preparing it to expand into forms of unimaginable diversity. Even the color of the world was affected. As oxygen accumulated, the skies cleared slightly, letting sunlight penetrate deeper into the waters. The ocean, once a dense dark haze, began to shimmer with soft blues and greens. Waves reflected the light, and the shallow waters glimmered with the subtle dance of microscopic life. Though no fish, no coral, no swimming predators existed yet, the first glimmers of a modern world were emerging, hidden in the quiet rhythm of the seas. This revolution also set the stage for another monumental step in life's journey. With more oxygen available, cells could grow larger, develop internal structures, and become more complex. Single-celled life, which had ruled the planet for billions of years, was no longer constrained by low-energy limitations. It could diversify. It could form symbiotic relationships, clustering together in ways that would one day give rise to multicellular organisms. The seeds of complexity, of movement, of predation were planted during this silent, invisible revolution. The oxygenation of the Earth did not happen without resistance. The transition was tumultuous. Many species of anaerobic organisms, those that had thrived without oxygen, could not survive the changes. But extinction is part of creation. The silent architects of the ocean had opened a door for life that could harness energy in ways never imagined. A slow, gentle, unstoppable transformation had begun, turning the oceans blue, clearing the skies, and reshaping the chemical and physical landscape of the planet. In the deep waters, stromatolites continued their patient construction. Cyanobacteria persisted, building layers, pumping oxygen into the world, never knowing that they were engineers of a global revolution. The seas, once murky and uninviting, were becoming a stage for new life. It was a quiet change, a transformation that would take millions of years, yet its effects would resonate forever. The Earth had taken its first breath of true oxygen, and with it came the possibility of movement, of vision, of life that could exist beyond the microscopic, in forms both beautiful and complex. The Great Oxygenation Event was not merely a chemical shift. It was the planet waking up. The silent waters began to hum with potential. The blue seas, glowing faintly under the alien sun, carried within them the promise of creatures that would one day swim, crawl, and fly. The Earth, once constrained by its own chemistry, had opened a door to a new era, an era of energy, of diversity, of life reaching beyond the smallest cell. And in that quiet, unseen revolution, the world learned an important lesson. Even the tiniest, simplest beings can reshape an entire planet. Even invisible life, patient and persistent, can set in motion forces that will echo through billions of years. The oceans, now slowly turning blue, were no longer just water and rock. They were the foundation of everything to come. After billions of years of quiet, patient life in the oceans, something extraordinary began to happen. For the first time, life did not simply drift in silence. It moved, it explored, it experimented. The stage was set, and the Cambrian period arrived, more than 500 million years ago, bringing with it a sudden burst of diversity that would change the oceans forever. Before the Cambrian, life was mostly microscopic, soft, and hidden. Single-celled organisms had given way to simple colonies, and oxygen had transformed the chemical landscape of the seas. Yet even the largest of these early organisms were tiny by today's standards, and they moved only in slow, gentle motions. Then, seemingly overnight in geological time, life became complex. Cells organized into tissues, tissues organized into bodies, bodies developed specialized parts. Eyes appeared, limbs formed, shells hardened, and predators began to roam the waters. The oceans, once silent and still, were now full of motion, competition, and endless variety. This period, now called the Cambrian Explosion, is one of the most remarkable chapters in Earth's history. In a few tens of millions of years, creatures of every imaginable shape and form appeared. Trilobites scuttled across the seafloor, their segmented bodies armored like tiny tanks. Anomalocaris, a predator unlike anything we can imagine today, glided through the waters, hunting with a pair of grasping appendages and a circular mouth lined with teeth. Worm-like creatures burrowed through sediment, leaving traces that would become fossilized impressions, a permanent record of life's new complexity. The oceans were alive in ways never seen before. Life experimented with new strategies, movement, sight, and defense. Some organisms developed hard shells to protect themselves from predators. Others became swift hunters, using sensory organs to detect prey from a distance. Every niche was filled, every habitat explored. Life diversified at an unprecedented pace, filling every corner of the shallow seas. Imagine swimming above the Cambrian seafloor. The water would be alive with tiny flashes of motion. Trilobites would scuttle along ridges of ancient stone, leaving delicate tracks behind. Strange, soft-bodied creatures would drift like ghosts through the water, their bodies pulsating as they fed or avoided predators. And everywhere, life would be moving, responding to the environment, interacting with one another in ways that had never existed before. Predation had begun. For the first time in history, one organism hunted another actively, rather than passively absorbing nutrients from the environment. This new behavior drove evolution forward, creating a feedback loop of adaptation and change. Hard shells evolved to resist predators, eyes developed to detect threats and prey, limbs evolved for crawling, swimming, or grasping. The Cambrian oceans were not only more diverse, they were also more dynamic, more interactive, and far more dangerous than any ocean had been before. But life was still constrained by the environment. Oxygen levels, although much higher than before, varied across the oceans. Shallow waters were rich and bustling, while the deep sea remained dark and mysterious, home to soft-bodied creatures whose fossils would rarely survive to tell their story. Yet even in these hidden depths, life continued to innovate, laying the foundation for future oceans teeming with diversity. This period was also marked by the first reefs. Tiny organisms began building structures of calcium carbonate, creating the earliest versions of habitats that would support complex marine life for millions of years. These reefs became centers of life, offering shelter, feeding grounds, and protection. They would become the ancestors of coral reefs, some of the most vibrant ecosystems on Earth today. The Cambrian explosion teaches us that evolution is not always slow. Life can sometimes surge forward, reshaping entire worlds in a relatively brief span of time. The oceans, once silent and uniform, were transformed into a vibrant theater of movement, interaction, and survival. In this theater, the first great predators and prey coexisted, each driving the other toward ever more complex forms. By the end of the Cambrian, the seas were a dazzling display of life. From microscopic plankton to armored trilobites to the strange alien shapes of creatures like hallucigenia, every inch of the ocean floor was alive. Life had learned not only to exist, but to compete, to adapt, and to innovate. The Earth, for the first time in its long history, was no longer a quiet, empty planet. It was a world pulsing with energy, possibility, and movement. And though the Cambrian lasted only a few tens of millions of years, its impact would echo forever. The body plans, strategies, and behaviors that evolved during this time laid the foundation for everything that would follow. Fish, arthropods, mollusks, and eventually vertebrates all owe their beginnings to this sudden, remarkable flowering of life. The oceans, once silent, had become a stage for one of the most incredible experiments in the history of the planet. The Cambrian seas remind us that life's potential is limitless, that even in the vast, empty expanses of a young world, the spark of creation can ignite in spectacular ways. They show us that complexity can emerge from simplicity, and that the tiniest, most unassuming creatures can shape the future of an entire planet. And as the waves of the ancient Cambrian seas lapped against the shorelines of continents yet to rise, life continued to flourish, preparing for the next chapter in Earth. This extraordinary story, a chapter that would bring even more wonder to the deep, quiet oceans and eventually a path toward the land itself. The Cambrian oceans were no longer silent. They were alive in ways that would have been unimaginable in the world before, a stage for creatures both strange and extraordinary. Among these creatures, one group stood out as masters of the deep, the trilobites. Their segmented armored bodies, their compound eyes, and their endless diversity made them some of the most successful and recognizable inhabitants of the early seas. Trilobites were everywhere. They scuttled across the sea floor, crawling over sediment and rocky reefs, searching for food, avoiding predators, and reproducing in astonishing numbers. Their hard exoskeletons protected them from the dangers of the early oceans, while their jointed limbs allowed them to move with agility and precision. Some species burrowed into sand or mud, hiding from larger hunters, while others glided openly along the ocean floor, confident in their strength and resilience. Yet trilobites were not the only masters of the deep. Predators had emerged, creatures unlike any seen before, equipped with appendages, jaws, or spiny bodies designed for hunting. One such creature, Anomalocaris, was a terrifying apex predator of its time. It had a flexible, segmented body, large compound eyes, and spiny, grasping limbs that it used to seize prey. Its circular mouth, lined with sharp plates, could crush smaller animals with ease. For the first time in Earth's history, active predation became a driving force of evolution, shaping the body plans and behaviors of countless other species. The appearance of these predators changed everything. Simple, soft-bodied creatures that had once floated freely now needed protection. Armor evolved in countless forms. Shells, spines, and rigid exoskeletons became common. Speed became essential, as many organisms learned to flee from danger rather than face it head-on. Eyes, once rare, proliferated. Sight became a powerful tool in the endless struggle for survival, allowing prey to detect threats and predators to locate food in a vast and mysterious ocean. The oceans of the Cambrian were filled with competition and diversity. Worm-like creatures burrowed through sediment, leaving intricate patterns that would become fossilized as trace fossils. Brachiopods, tiny shelled animals, clung to rocks, filtering nutrients from the water. Early mollusks experimented with soft bodies, tentacles, and shells, learning to navigate the new challenges of predation. Even the plankton drifting through the sunlit waters became an essential part of the food chain, supporting larger animals and contributing to the cycling of nutrients throughout the seas. The variety of life forms was astonishing. Some trilobites developed long spines to discourage attacks, while others evolved flattened bodies to glide along the seabed. Predators experimented with body shapes and hunting strategies. The arms race between hunter and prey drove rapid innovation in anatomy, behavior, and survival strategies. Every movement, every adaptation, every new feature was a step forward in the unfolding story of life. The oceans were layered with habitats. Shallow waters teemed with sunlight, supporting photosynthetic organisms and their predators. Deeper waters, dark and quiet, were home to soft-bodied animals and filter-feeding creatures, surviving on the slow drift of nutrients from above. Rocky reefs offered shelter and feeding grounds, while sand and mudflats became hunting grounds and nurseries for countless species. Every niche in the ocean, from the surface to the deep, was explored, occupied, and transformed by the earliest masters of the seas. In this dynamic world, trilobites became icons of survival and adaptation. Their fossilized remains, preserved in rocks across the world, tell a story of resilience, diversity, and ingenuity. They were not just creatures, they were pioneers, shaping the oceans through their movements, behaviors, and sheer abundance. They were the first to thrive in a world dominated by predators and competition, setting the stage for future life to evolve in complexity and variety. But the masters of the deep were more than a collection of species. They were evidence of a new principle, that life, given the right conditions and the passage of time, can flourish in ways beyond imagination. Predators like Anomalocaris forced prey to innovate. Prey forced predators to refine their strategies. This delicate balance, this dance of survival and adaptation, became the engine of evolution itself. The Cambrian oceans were no longer a quiet, lifeless expanse. They were a theater of action, filled with tension, innovation, and constant change. Life had learned to move, to see, to hide, to hunt. The Earth had transformed from a simple watery planet into a dynamic, interactive ecosystem where every creature, no matter how small, had a role to play. And as trilobites crawled across the seafloor, as predators glided through the water, and as countless unseen organisms drifted in the currents, the stage was set for the next chapter in Earth's history. Life would continue to evolve, explore, and conquer new realms. The oceans, full of innovation, competition, and survival, were preparing for a future even more extraordinary. One that would eventually lead to creatures venturing out of the water and onto the land itself. The masters of the deep, though long extinct, left a legacy that echoes through time. Their fossils are reminders of a world filled with innovation, risk, and the relentless drive of life to thrive. And in the quiet stillness of the oceans today, we can imagine them gliding through ancient waters, shaping the seas, and paving the way for all life that followed. The Cambrian seas were alive, vibrant, and teeming with activity in their shallow waters. Yet far below the sunlit surface lay a world entirely different. The deep oceans were dark, cold, and mysterious, a realm untouched by sunlight and still unfamiliar to the early pioneers of life. In this hidden, shadowed world, life took a different path. It adapted not to the glare of the sun or the warmth of shallow waters, but to the constant pressures of depth, the creeping cold, and the near-complete absence of light. Here, in the twilight of the early oceans, organisms evolved in extraordinary ways. Without vision as a guide, they relied on other senses: touch, vibration, chemical signals, and currents. Some creatures grew delicate, translucent bodies, making themselves nearly invisible to predators that could sense movement through water. Others developed protective armor, or long spines to discourage attacks. Life in the deep oceans was not less complex than the shallow seas. It was just different, specialized for a world defined by darkness. Among these early deep-sea dwellers were worm-like creatures, some burrowing into soft sediments, some floating slowly above the ocean floor. They left intricate traces behind, patterns that would fossilize over millions of years, giving scientists today a glimpse into their ancient existence. These trace fossils tell stories of slow, deliberate movement, feeding, and survival in a place where sunlight could not penetrate. Every ripple, every line etched in the sediment is a testament to the persistence of life in the shadows. Predators of the deep evolved along lines, quite unlike those in the sunlit shallows. They did not chase with speed or sight. They ambushed, they sensed, they waited. Some extended long appendages to sweep the water for prey, capturing organisms that drifted too close. Others relied on chemical detection, following minute signals released by their food through the currents. Every strategy was a careful adaptation to an environment in which energy was scarce, and survival depended on patience, precision, and subtlety. The deep oceans were also home to creatures with remarkable biochemistry. Some may have harbored glowing pigments, a primitive form of bioluminescence, though most of this is speculative. The light of bioluminescent organisms, flickering and shifting in the darkness, would have created a hauntingly beautiful underwater landscape. Shadows and glimmers moved silently across the seabed, hinting at life that was invisible to the surface world. These early adaptations foreshadowed the incredible diversity of deep-sea life that would evolve over hundreds of millions of years, producing organisms that can survive today in total darkness at crushing pressures. Even in these quiet, alien waters, life was connected. The death of one organism became the sustenance of another. Nutrients slowly cycled through the currents as scavengers and decomposers ensured that nothing went entirely to waste. The deep oceans, though isolated, were part of the same ecological web as the shallower seas. Predation, competition, and adaptation were still at play, just on a slower, subtler scale. Every ripple of movement, every feeding act, every chemical exchange contributed to the balance of life. Interestingly, some of the earliest deep-sea creatures were soft-bodied, unlike the armored trilobites of the shallows. Their flexibility allowed them to move in confined spaces, slip through sediments, and adapt to narrow crevices. Fossils of these soft-bodied organisms are rare, yet they tell a story of resilience, innovation, and survival against challenges that the early ocean surface had never faced. Life had diversified not only in form, but in strategy, filling every ecological niche available. The deep-sea realm was also remarkably stable in temperature. Unlike the shallow waters, which were affected by storms, tides, and volcanic activity, the deep seas maintained a constant chill. This stability allowed specialized organisms to thrive, developing long life cycles, slow growth, and strategies that relied on conservation rather than rapid reproduction. Life in darkness taught patience, a slow unfolding of evolutionary experiments that would persist over countless generations. While the shallow oceans were a theater of explosive activity, competition, and predation, the deep oceans were a laboratory of adaptation. Here, life learned the art of subtlety. It learned to sense rather than see, to glide rather than chase, to wait rather than attack. Every adaptation reflected the pressures of a world so different from the sunlit surface that it might have seemed another planet entirely. Yet these dark waters were no less crucial to Earth's story. Many of the innovations that occurred in the deep oceans, sensory adaptation, chemical detection, camouflage, and energy-efficient survival, laid the groundwork for future life forms, even those that would one day venture onto land. The principles of survival learned in shadow would echo in the strategies of amphibians, reptiles, and eventually mammals. Life in darkness was not a side story. It was a foundation, a quiet, enduring lesson in resilience, patience, and ingenuity. As the Cambrian period continued, the contrast between the bustling, sunlit shallows and the deep, quiet shadows became more pronounced. Life was learning to occupy every available space, to adapt to every possible condition, and to exploit the unique characteristics of each habitat. It was an age of exploration on a microscopic scale, where every environment, bright or dark, warm or cold, shallow or deep, became a stage for evolution's experiments. The deep oceans of the Cambrian were vast, silent, and mysterious. Yet they were alive with motion, filled with creatures whose lives, though largely hidden, contributed to the rhythm and balance of the planet. In these shadow depths, life proved its ingenuity, its capacity to endure, and its ability to flourish even where light and warmth could not reach. And as the ages passed, the lessons of the deep, patience, adaptation, and the subtle interplay of survival would echo throughout the oceans, shaping the evolution of life across the planet. The silent, shadowed seas had their own story to tell, a story of endurance and quiet mastery, a story that would forever be part of the epic history of life on Earth. For hundreds of millions of years, life in the oceans had existed in myriad forms, from tiny drifting microbes to armored trilobites, from soft-bodied deep dwellers to cunning predators of the shallows. Yet one remarkable evolutionary step was still on the horizon: the rise of early fish, the first vertebrates, whose bodies and behaviors would set the stage for all creatures that could move, sense, and explore the waters in ways far beyond what had come before. The earliest fish were unlike the ones we know today. They were small, jawless, and often armored with bony plates for protection. Their skeletons were simple, built from cartilage rather than hardened bone. Yet, within these modest bodies lay a remarkable innovation: a backbone, a central column of vertebrae that provided both structure and flexibility. This development allowed them to swim with precision, to maneuver through complex environments, and to survive in ways that soft-bodied organisms could not. These primitive fish were hunters in their own right. Though they lacked jaws, they fed by suction or by scraping soft tissue and detritus from the ocean floor. Some likely filtered water through their gill structures to extract tiny organisms, while others grazed on early plant-like life or scavenged for decaying matter. They were not the top predators of their time. That title belonged to creatures like Anomalocaris. But they were agile, persistent, and capable of exploiting niches that had remained largely untouched. Movement in these early vertebrates was subtle, yet revolutionary. Paired fins, small but functional, allowed them to stabilize themselves as they glided through the water. Their tails, simple yet efficient, provided propulsion and the ability to steer. Over time, fins evolved in shape and position, giving these early fish the ability to make sharper turns, chase prey, or evade predators. Every adjustment, every small evolutionary innovation was a step toward a more active, mobile life, a life that could explore every corner of the ocean. Sensory systems were also evolving. Early fish developed rudimentary eyes, sensitive to light and motion, allowing them to detect predators and prey even in the dim waters of the deeper seas. Nerves and sensory cells in the skin could sense vibrations and currents, providing awareness of their surroundings even when vision was limited. These adaptations made early fish more interactive participants in their ecosystems. They were no longer passive drifters. They were hunters, explorers, and survivors. The oceans themselves were transforming to accommodate these new forms of life. Oxygen levels, once dangerously low, had risen to levels that could support more active organisms. Shallow reefs, rocky outcrops, and sand plains became arenas for movement, feeding, and reproduction. Early fish moved among these environments, seeking shelter, hunting for food, and avoiding larger predators. Their activity influenced the distribution of other life forms, creating dynamic ecosystems where motion, competition, and interaction became the defining characteristics. One of the most remarkable aspects of early fish was their ability to combine protection with mobility. Their bony plates shielded vital organs, while their flexible bodies allowed quick escape from danger. Some species developed spines or sharp projections to deter predators, while others relied on speed, agility, or camouflage. These strategies were the beginning of an evolutionary arms race, a pattern that would repeat across countless generations and species throughout Earth's history. Early fish were also shaping the future in less obvious ways. Their feeding habits stirred sediments, affecting nutrient distribution and providing opportunities for smaller organisms to thrive. Their movements encouraged symbiotic relationships, as some smaller creatures followed or attached themselves to the more mobile fish. In this way, early fish were not just surviving, they were reshaping the environment, influencing ecological dynamics, and preparing the oceans for ever greater complexity. While the shallow waters of the Cambrian had teemed with diverse and often spectacular life, the emergence of vertebrates represented a new era of possibility. These fish were the first animals to explore the full three-dimensional space of the oceans actively. They could chase prey across the floor, hover in mid-water, or dart near reefs. They introduced behaviors like pursuit, evasion, and territoriality that had previously been unknown. Life was no longer defined solely by survival through passive adaptation. It was now defined by movement, strategy, and interaction. The rise of early fish was not without danger. Predators were everywhere, from the lurking anomalies of the Cambrian to the rapid armored trilobites. Yet vertebrates had a distinct advantage: flexibility. They could change direction, adapt their movements, and exploit new strategies for feeding and defense. Their evolutionary success was not immediate, but it was steady, persistent, and transformative. As these small, jawless fish multiplied, diversified, and explored the oceans, they laid the foundation for the incredible diversity of vertebrates that would eventually dominate the seas, colonize rivers, and even venture onto land. Fins would become limbs, sensory systems would become sophisticated brains and eyes, and the earliest experiments in movement would evolve into the coordinated, powerful motion seen in countless species. The oceans, once dominated by stillness, by slow-moving microbes, and by armored invertebrates, were now alive with motion, strategy, and possibility. Life had entered a new chapter, a chapter defined by movement, complexity, and adaptation. And it all began with these first humble fish, small, jawless, and unassuming, yet carrying within them the blueprint for every vertebrate that would ever exist. In the quiet, sunlit waters, they swam, exploring, feeding, and surviving. In the deeper shadows, they sensed currents, avoided danger, and prepared for the endless possibilities of evolution. And in this way, the oceans were transformed once again into a realm of active life, innovation, and potential, ready for the next extraordinary chapter in the history of Earth's creatures. The oceans, which had been the cradle of life for billions of years, were now bustling with motion, complexity, and diversity. Early fish swam with increasing skill, predators hunted with precision, and ecosystems had evolved layers of interaction that defined the Cambrian and post-Cambrian seas. Yet a new frontier beckoned: the land, an untamed, sunlit, and unclaimed world. Life, which had existed entirely within the protective embrace of water, was about to take its first steps into a realm without buoyancy, without constant moisture, and without the familiar chemical environment of the oceans. These first pioneers were not fish as we know them, but their distant relatives, small, finned vertebrates that began to explore shallow waters near the shore. The boundary between land and sea was an unstable, dynamic space. Tidal pools, marshy deltas, and shallow coastal lagoons offered opportunities for experimentation. Here, creatures could leave water for brief periods, exploit new sources of food, and avoid some aquatic predators. The selective pressures were intense, but the potential rewards were immense. Life on land offered untapped resources and space free from the relentless competition of the oceans. Movement was key. The fins of these early vertebrates, once purely for swimming, began to adapt. Muscles strengthened, bones elongated, and the skeletal structures that had allowed maneuvering in water slowly acquired the capacity to support weight against gravity. Limbs, in their earliest forms, were experiments in balance, coordination, and support. Each push against the substrate, each lift of the body out of water, was a tentative step toward life beyond the seas. The skin, too, underwent remarkable changes. Aquatic animals are surrounded by water, constantly hydrated, and protected from drying. Life on land demanded resistance to desiccation. Early pioneers developed thicker skin and protective coverings to retain moisture, allowing them to venture further from water without perishing. These adaptations, though subtle, would become essential for survival in terrestrial environments. Every inch of exposed surface was a delicate negotiation between opportunity and risk. The lungs, or their precursors, were another vital adaptation. Primitive air-breathing structures, initially used for gulping oxygen in oxygen-poor water or shallow pools, began to evolve. These rudimentary lungs allowed early vertebrates to extract oxygen from the atmosphere, not just water, giving them the ability to remain outside for longer periods. Paired with fin-based locomotion, primitive lungs provided the tools for the first real excursions onto land. The shorelines themselves were a theatre of experimentation. Mudflats and tidal zones teemed with microorganisms, insects, and small crustaceans, a buffet of life waiting for the first invaders to exploit. For those early pioneers brave enough to venture onto land, food was abundant, competition was low, and survival was possible, provided adaptations continued. Each foray into the terrestrial realm was risky, but the rewards included access to new habitats, new sources of sustenance, and the beginnings of a radical expansion of life's range. Predation, while diminished on land compared to the oceans, was still a factor. Early terrestrial invertebrates posed threats to the first land vertebrates. Tiny, fast-moving predators could prey on small fish stranded in tidal pools. Yet, these challenges only accelerated adaptation. Faster movement, better coordination, and enhanced sensory abilities became essential. Life on land demanded not only structural change, but also behavioral ingenuity. Every step, every cautious crawl, was part of a long experiment in survival. Reproduction also presented challenges. Aquatic life could rely on water for dispersing eggs and sperm, but the terrestrial environment required innovation. Early amphibious species retained ties to water for reproduction, laying eggs in pools or moist substrates. The dependence on water shaped their behavior and distribution, anchoring life's first terrestrial experiments to coastal zones and wetlands. Yet the potential for greater independence, for eventual full terrestriality, was beginning to emerge. By the late stages of this era, small amphibian-like creatures had mastered the first real movements on land. They could crawl, climb over rocks, and exploit resources unavailable to purely aquatic species. Each step was a triumph, a testament to patience, persistence, and the incremental power of evolution. What began as a simple fin lift or brief excursion onto a tidal flat would, over millions of years, become the foundation for fully terrestrial life. Reptiles, mammals, birds, and the countless creatures that populate Earth today. The oceans, once the entire world of life, had nurtured countless innovations. Stromatolites built oxygen, early fish learned to move and sense, predators and prey shaped behaviors and defenses, and the dynamic interactions of millions of species set the stage for life to explore land. Now, with the first vertebrates crawling from shallow waters, life had expanded its domain. The Earth was no longer just an ocean planet. It was a place where land and water, air and water, light and shadow, all became part of the living landscape. This step onto land, humble though it may have seemed at the time, was a monumental moment in Earth's history. It represented courage, adaptation, and opportunity. It was a moment when life dared to leave the familiar, to risk exposure and desiccation, and to confront gravity, temperature, and predation in an entirely new realm. The first steps of life out of water were tiny, cautious, and deliberate, yet they carried within them the promise of everything to come. Forests, deserts, rivers, and all the creatures that would one day walk, crawl, run, and fly upon the land. And so, the story of the ancient seas came to a close. From murky, lifeless waters to vibrant Cambrian oceans, from armored trilobites to early fish, from deep-sea darkness to the first steps onto land, life had evolved, adapted, and persevered. The oceans had nurtured the beginnings of movement, complexity, and innovation. And as the first vertebrates emerged onto the land, they carried with them the legacy of countless generations, the lessons of survival in water, and the promise of life that would one day fill every corner of the earth. The prehistoric seas, once silent and mysterious, had given rise to a world ready for terrestrial exploration, a world poised for new stories, new creatures, and new adventures in life's remarkable journey across our planet.